can I be lost when I don't know where I'm going? Chapter 2. Preparations for the trip, the agony and the ecstasy. On June 1st, I began preparing for this pilgrimage. The logistics were not easy. In fact, they were really hard. At that time, I was thinking in terms of a trip of approximately 4 months, returning to Las Cruces in December and finishing my degree work in the spring semester of 1989. I had told Mark that I hated to think of looking for housing when I returned, and he suggested that I just keep my rental house. I knew I couldn't afford to do that, even though it would have been comforting to know I had a place to return to. I had a sublet clause in my lease, however. I recognized that to rent out the house with all my furnishings might prove to be more of a hassle than a blessing, so I let it go. I decided to store all my stuff at Beckon's local warehouse. You can't have it all. You must set priorities. First order of business for me was setting up finances. I called my investment company and got information on what must be done to have my monthly check deposited directly into a daily passport trust account I had. This account is a joy. It's tied to a Visa card. You can write checks on it, and it earns money market rates. Best of all, it can be used all over the world. All one needs to do is stop at any full-service bank and get a cash advance, and it's deducted from the account. I had used it in Italy, and it seemed an easier way to take care of money needs than carrying traveler's checks or trying to get a check cashed. Indeed, I could have my check deposited monthly just as long as I sent off a letter to that effect. On the 6th, I sent a letter of instruction to the investment firm. I knew the sooner we got this direct deposit set up, the better I'd feel. I certainly didn't want to be on the road and not have money. It is, after all, a necessary evil in the plan. Checked with Beckon's, and it would cost approximately $50 per month to have 3,000 pounds of furniture stored, insured. Way to go. In spite of a hectic schedule, lots of friends stopping by to ask if I really was going to do this wild, crazy trip, lots of yard work, obedience classes for ink, and lots of details to handle, I at last found time to get into Tessie and look her over carefully. She was small, but had everything I needed. A 2-burner propane stove, a sink, a refrigerator, and a potty. Oh yes, the potty. It was a yellow plastic affair that I had started calling Big Bertha, and it was really intimidating. As best I could determine, this yellow monstrosity was to be filled with water and chemicals, then from time to time lifted out of the head and dumped. At this point, I had never even seen a dump station. There was a lever at the bottom for dumping Big Bertha's 8-gallon water capacity. I kept looking at her and kept wondering just how I emptied that affair without soaking my feet, but decided there must be a way. The refrigerator did not seem to be working, and I could get no lights in the camper when the engine was not running. It was time for help. I called the local RV garage and set up an appointment for June 16 to have the refrigerator, the potty, and the converter unit checked. As is usual, the camper was in the shop until the 22nd. When I'd call, they'd tell me they had the refrigerator online and are burping it, whatever that meant. When I finally went for tests, the mechanic who worked on her was very helpful. He showed me how the converter unit worked and told me I needed a deep cycling battery so that I would have lights when I wasn't plugged into electricity. The refrigerator was working and could be operated on 120 volts, propane, or battery. I inquired about a holding tank and found the cost too high. The mechanic said that the seals on Big Bertha no longer held. When I suggested that they would probably swell if she had some water in her, he looked at me rather quizzically and asked, "Are you sure you want to deal with that tank?" Good question. I left the RV place and went to Sears to check on deep cycling batteries. They had them, so I bought one. They set up on an appointment to have it installed that evening, and I also scheduled an oil change for Tessie. When I got home, I yanked Big Bertha out of the camper and filled it with water right there in the middle of the yard. I do believe that the seals would have swelled and worked, but I found that with the potty full of water there was no way I could move it. My neighbor and I together couldn't budge it. Time for an executive decision. Big Bertha was regulated to the garage sale. That evening when I was at Sears, I bought a small hassock-type potty that a small woman could handle easily. I spent the next morning trying to level the camper. The mechanic had told me that she should be level for the refrigerator to work properly. I put a small bubble level in the refrigerator, then I'd pull forward a bit, hop out, and into the camper to check. Then I'd back a bit and into the camper again to check the level. I kept up this routine for 2 hours, found the only place Tessie was level was out on the sidewalk. To compound the problem of leveling, when John had put new tires on the camper, he had had larger, wider radials installed on the back, which meant that even if the site were level, the camper would not be. It never dawned on me at that stage of my experience to place a couple of boards under the front tires. No, I just kept backing and forwarding, laughing wildly as I hopped in and out of the camper to check the bubble. Thank God I'm not easily discouraged, but it did cross my mind that I really didn't know much about this camping routine. Some preparations were easier. I was sitting in Tessie after trying to bed for the first time and decided a sleeping bag was the way to go. No bed linens to deal with. I knew it would store easily on the deck along with a large plastic box for clothes. Tessie had come equipped with neat little blue denim storage bags hung in strategic places. There were 2 compartments for dishes by the stove. She had a shelf for canned goods and one for cooking equipment. The shelves in the clothes closet would accommodate 2 plastic storage boxes plus my toaster oven and still hold a few jackets and trousers. Ink's dry meal would fit below the hung clothes. I sat there and realized there was adequate space for one who wished to simplify her life, just no room for excess baggage. I had bought some of the rubberized matting that holds things secure, and how sweet it was to pull out of the drive and not have everything rolling around in the back of the camper. It really does work. I even wrapped the clothes rod with it and never had the hanger slip off. On the 27th, I popped the top. The spring was formidable. After a good spraying with WD-40, it worked more easily, but I knew my arm muscles were going to get a good workout each day. I applied a coat of Celastic to all the seams, around the zippers for the flaps, and to a few tiny holes I could see. Then I washed it and armoralled it. While I was working away, I thought, I still don't understand how this converter unit works. When I went into the house, I called the mechanic and wrote it all down. On the 28th, I made arrangements for a post office box and joined Good Sam. My next-door neighbors had lent me a copy of their Good Sam campground guide. It was such fun to read it and dream. I'm not sure I would ever have gotten myself together for this journey without the support of the Ivises. Ken and Marin were campers. They thought the Chinook was great. They kept assuring me that I'd have a ball, but from time to time I did have my doubts. The evening of the full moon, after alerting the Ivises to come looking for me if I was not back by noon, I loaded Ink and a few things into the camper. We headed 15 miles north of Las Cruces to Leesburg State Park to try this camping routine. Well, I'd forgotten a cooking pot and I couldn't get the refrigerator to work. I sat at the picnic table eating cold chili and watched the moon rise over the Oregon mountains. There was something so serene and peaceful about the setting, about this connection with nature, that I was totally unconcerned about the non-working of the refrigerator. I could operate the converter unit and did have lights. However, with that brilliant moon, we didn't need them. Ink hopped up to the passenger seat where I had put her feather pillow and snuggled into the sleeping bag. We both spent a lot of time that night just looking and listening, savoring the beauty of the setting, the Rio Grande, the Robledo Mountains, the moon's peaceful white light. It was a lovely night. I thought, this is going to be okay, just as soon as I learn how to operate all those gadgets in Tessie. Thank God for my optimism. The 1st of July was a day of decision. I knew I wanted to make this journey, so I gave notice to my landlord that I would be vacating the house on August 1st. The die was cast. If June was hectic, July was a total scruncher. Too many decisions to make and too many things to do. I vacillated between moments of total panic and moments of total elation. However, I kept plugging away, fighting anxiety attacks and handling all the knotty details. Ken Ives up to the passenger seat where I had put her feather pillow and snuggled into the sleeping bag. We both spent a lot of time that night just looking and listening, savoring the beauty of the setting, the Rio Grande, the Robledo Mountains, the moon's peaceful white light. It was a lovely night. I thought, this is going to be okay. Just as soon as I learned how to operate all those gadgets in Tessie. Thank God for my optimism. The 1st of July was a day of decision. I knew I wanted to make this journey, so I gave notice to my landlord that I would be vacating the house on August 1st. The die was cast. If June was hectic, July was a total scruncher. Too many decisions to make and too many things to do. I vacillated between moments of total panic and moments of total elation. However, I kept plugging away, fighting anxiety attacks and handling all the knotty details. Ken Ives suggested taking the good Clarion speakers from my car and using them in the camper. He made boxes for them which fit behind the front seats. He also installed a CB unit for me. Mark had insisted that I have one. Of course, I kept thinking, if I had to put out a call for help, I had no idea who might hear that I was a helpless sitting duck, but I did have a CD. When Ken installed those speakers, I knew I'd have great sound and jazz all the way. I had a friend and previous neighbor, Birchie, who graciously offered to store my car in her lower garage. Since the insurance was scheduled to be renewed on the 15th of July, I took the car out to Birch's on the 14th and put her up, then dropped the insurance. I was planning to finish my final semester of degree work at New Mexico State University in the spring of '89, so I had packed the car with things I would need for that semester. If I decided not to get my furniture out of storage, I had promised myself this was the last time I was going to pack my life in boxes. This was the 21st time in 30 years that I had packed everything up. I made a covenant with myself that it would be the last time. Those boxes would not be unpacked until I was ready to settle in and never move again. I had to keep reminding myself that this time the packing was my choice, nobody else's. But I was really strung out doing all this packing, the car, packing the camper, packing the Birkins, sorting stuff for a garage sale. I remember walking one morning feeling so dragged out and thinking, what am I doing? This is a comfortable life. I have a pleasant little house, good neighbors. There's always that, what am I doing? It's always scary to let go of the cozy status quo. That fear of the unknown is always sticky. Perhaps it's why so many women stay in the situation they'd be better off without. Yes, the comfortable status quo is alluring. However, by this time I was sure I was doing what was right for me. The inner voice kept saying, it's going to be a grand adventure. Hang in there, Barb. I would say to myself, we're not what we eat, we're what we think. And I thought this was the way for me. I had become an inner calling. When Joseph Campbell stated on The Power of Myth, I must all seek our own bliss, I knew he was talking to me. I kept handling more details, saw my lawyer and let her know about all my financial matters. Charlotte is my PR and needed this information. Besides, I had to recognize that I could have an accident. I wanted to be certain all would be handled properly for my sons. Life hangs by a tenuous thread. None of us has any assurances from one day to the next. Better to acknowledge that death is part of the whole process and have things in order. I had a bunch of stuff that was too expensive to pay storage on. A ton of rocks my geologist son Mark had given me over the years, a potter's wheel, a loom, and porch furniture. Here again, good, kind friends offered to store it for me. On the 21st, Pam came by in her pickup truck, and we took 2 plants I couldn't part with to the Boyces, my wheel and loom to Zindorf's, and Pam took all the rocks to her garage. Ivises had offered to store and use porch furniture, and a group of outdoor planters. I am very pleased with wonderful friends. I had placed an ad in the bulletin for a garage sale for Saturday only, in spite of knowing I really didn't want to grapple with it. Still, I had a bunch of stuff that I had weeded out, and what better way to dispose of it? It was the Ivises who came to my rescue. Cheryl, their 15-year-old daughter, had said that she'd help me set it up. When Pam and I returned from delivering all my things to Friends Storing, I was wise enough to go next door and avail myself of the help so kindly offered. Cheryl was a gem. No emotional ties about old cookie jars for her. She just priced all that junk, carried it to the garage, and displayed it. Her young brother, Ben, polished copper. In about 2 hours, the sale was ready. Samantha and her daughter came to help with the sale on Saturday morning. People were waiting outside when they arrived. By 1 p.m., most of what I considered a bunch of junk was gone. People will buy anything if the price is right. The highlight of the sale for me was when a sturdy man picked up Big Bertha, paid the price marked on her, and carted her off as if he had been looking for a big yellow pot all his life. Sam, Theo, and I celebrated by going out for a Chinese dinner. I had scheduled Beckons to take furniture to storage on Friday, July 29th. The final days of July were devoted to packing, yard work, and talking with friends who dropped by. As the house looked more and more like some kind of storage depot, Tessie looked more and more homey. I had hung my cross-eyed ratablo on the toilet door, my wooden butterfly over the bed, and even had a green plant with me. After all, this camper was going to be home for a while, and she just seemed to expand to hold all the items I wanted with her. I was so tired, I was running on sheer determination, but when I climbed into Tessie, I just knew everything was going to be fine. When the refrigerator started humming when I plugged it into 120 volt, perhaps it had one last burp in it, but it was working beautifully now. Ink certainly sensed that we were going to do something. I worried a bit about how this young, exuberant dog was going to fare on our travels, but I did know that this sweet girl would rather be with me than anywhere else. I had found a great 15-foot nylon lead that hooked around the bumper and gave her room to move and leeway to hop into the camper when she desired. Didn't want to lose this lovely travel companion. Samantha had brought Ink to me shortly after I had put down a lovely mutt I had had for 16 years. I had said with Ginger's demise, no more dogs for a while. Then Sam arrived with this black bundle of joy, and I was hooked. Ink had been whelped on May 9th. Her mother was a purebred English Springer Spaniel, and her father a purebred Gordon Setter. She was a mellow, sturdy dog. Ink had become an important part of my life and would be with me on this journey. I had a lot of people say she'd be protection. However, I knew Ink and realized that the only protection she might afford was kissing someone to death. This sweet gal was no guard dog, but she was such good company, I wouldn't have left her behind for the world. When Beckons arrived at 9 a.m. on the 29th, everything was ready. I had done all the packing with the exceptions of some large pictures, glass tops for tables, and one big mirror. It was just a matter of tagging everything and loading it. I was setting out in the yard watching all this when my neighbor Lars came over. He asked, "Barb, how long will you be gone?" To which I replied, "I don't know. If I head out and find I don't like it, I may be back next week, Lars." By noon the house was bare. I was so tired I lay down on the floor on my sleeping bag and went sound asleep. I slept that night in Tessie, parked up at the side of the house. Ink was in the backyard but kept the camper in sight. Then Saturday I tackled the final cleaning chores. It was infinitely easier with everything out of the way. By this time I was moving and looking like some kind of zombie. I was standing in the living room in a state of shock, leaning against the vacuum cleaner when another friend, Lori, arrived. She took one look at me, grabbed the vacuum cleaner, and did the whole house while I finished more arranging and tests. I really needed help, and here it was. It was a good and generous gesture. We went out for lunch and a final visit. Lori said she thought I was so brave and courageous to set out all by myself. Strange I didn't view my trip as an act of courage, but many people did. For me, it was just something I wanted and needed to do. I did realize that not many women in our society would make a choice like this. No matter, one must seek her own way, her own bliss. After all, life is a long, solitary road which we must travel alone and in our own way. We're all pilgrims. The last day, Steve and Mary, my landlords, came by for a final check of their property and found it to their liking. Norma picked me up at noon for a goodbye party with friends. I had asked if she would drive because I feared if I drove away in Tessie, Ink would self-destruct. She knew we were going somewhere in that camper, and she wanted to be with me. With all these dear people, there was this necessity to inquire on my itinerary and schedule. We're all so conditioned to have a plan, to say this is Thursday, so I must be in Anytown, USA. My refusal to commit myself to anything but the fact that I was heading north, then east, seemed hard for people to accept. For that matter, I wondered if I could ease off and just meander, as I hoped to do. I had promised myself that this journey was to take me anywhere I decided to go, with stops anywhere that looked inviting. I did not want to set up certain distances each day, just wanted to meander and enjoy. I was so blessed to have the time to do it. No 2-week vacation from work to see as much as possible. I had time and planned to savor it. The party was fun. I knew all these friends were concerned about my zany undertaking, and I was touched. I assured them I would not place myself in any compromising positions. Norma gave me a foot-operated tire pump in case of a flat a million miles from help. The Boyces gave me a compass so I'd know whether or not I was headed north. Zendorf's presented me with a bucket and shovel for any archaeological studies I might undertake. And Seamers gave me 2 key rings, one with a big thumb for hitchhiking, the other with a whistle for protection. Fun things from fun people whom I'd miss. Returned to the empty house and placed final phone calls to both my sons. Mark had sent me one of his AT&T credit cards and told me he expected a call once a week. I told him I'd not promised that, but would check in. Scott was admonishing me to drive carefully. There was a total role reversal here. I assured my sons that I would be fine, would drive carefully, and would stay in touch. I had given them my license number and knew if they needed me, the state police would find me somewhere on the nation's highways. I reminded them that no news is good news and that I love them very much. Took the phone off the wall and packed it in Tessie. After hugs and tearful goodbyes to the Ivises, I drove out to park up in Pam's driveway for the night and ease my jangled nerves in her jacuzzi. Pam Smith is an archaeologist with the Bureau of Land Management in Las Cruces, a delightful young woman whose friendship is very precious to me. It was Pam who was going to forward mail to me while I was traveling. Pammy understood my need to do this journey and was so supportive. It was nice to have a quiet evening with this good friend. We stretched out in the jacuzzi, listened to Beethoven, and discussed mail drops. I had to admit to being too afraid to make any more decisions. The synapses would not function. We both knew that mail sent to general delivery was held for 10 days, then returned to the sender. I decided that small towns with only one zip code and one post office were my preference. Pam said she'd check my local box once a week, sort out magazines and junk mail, and forward to me once a month. Not too definitive, but okay for starters. Pam and I hugged fondly, agreed we'd talk more about mail in the morning, and said good nights. I eased on out to Tessie, where Ink and I conked. Pam woke me a little past 6 in the morning with a steaming cup of good, strong coffee. I felt like a truck had run over me, but tension will do that. We decided that Greeley, Colorado should be the first mail pickup. I could not make any further decisions, so told Pam I'd just have to let her know of future drops once I was underway. With that, we hugged, said see you later, and Pam left for work. I laboriously got the caravan together for the last details to be handled in Las Cruces. I left Pam's by 9:30 a.m., stopped at the bank, filled Tessie with gasoline, checked the tire pressure, and noted the odometer read 38,361 miles. Then to Beckons to pay the moving bill plus 3 months of storage. Last stop was the veterinarian's for heartworm pills and a duplicate vaccination certificate for Ink. We were on our way north by noon. I had made it. So far, I could determine everything was handled. I was now responsible only to myself, my dog, and this neat little Toyota Chinook. Oh, joy.